Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining today. So what I'm going to be going over today is a summary of a experiment that the growth team is reaching the end of the build stage for, and it centers around our trial registration flow. So recently in mid-May, we rolled out some changes to our trial registration flow to simplify it a little bit, remove some fields here or there, and just try and attempt to make it a little bit faster to get through for users, just because we found there's a lot of steps. So I'll just start off by quickly going through that flow just to set a baseline for everyone in case anyone hasn't gone through our registration flow in a little bit. So just starting off at about.gitlab.com, one of our most common entry points, we have our get free trial CTA up there on the top right, and then we have the general trial registration form right here. We do have a lot of content on this page. Some of it's fantastic. We have our really great social proof over here in the bottom right. We have some information here provided to users, but then we also provide a lot of text as well, which is an observation we had as we were going through that work in mid-May. So let's click through, fill out some of these fields here, and then we'll move on to the next step. So here we have our verification step, which as some people may be aware, can vary from one step to two step to three step, depending on what your assessed risk is. I'll just go with our base level of verifying the email address. Pretty much they just get that email code, fill it in, and continue on in the process from there. And then they reach our welcome to GitLab screen, which is our first initial, personalization step, where we ask for role, why they're signing up, and who will be using this. We use this information in different ways. We don't use it a whole lot in product, and our goal is eventually in the future to use this in a lot more dynamic ways to surface some initial onboarding experiences that are, directly related to what a user's role is or who will be using it and so on. So I'll quickly fill out all of this, and then I'll move on to the tell us about your company step. This step very much focused on GTM. So a lot of this information, this page used to be a lot longer, used to have maybe six or seven fields. Uh, in mid-May, we reduced it down to three, but we may need to add a couple more in. So there may need to be some switching around that has here, but we have company name, country, and contact information there. So this is essentially to help our GTM team to reach out to these prospects should they become a prospect that they want to reach out to. Last step is just to create or import a project. So we made some simplifications here to, customize this step, pre-fill this, because one piece of feedback we're getting is users didn't quite understand the relationship between groups and projects. So asking them for a group or project name, a lot of people didn't know what to call it. So we pre-filled that based on their username, and then we also have template information down here, and then they can continue in the process. And then they get landed on our quick start page. So through this work, we were able to do a lot of exploration into, what we thought could work, but we didn't really get to do everything we wanted to do. And we still felt like there was some things left on the table that would be good adjustments to make in the future. So this led us wanting to do a lightweight registration experiment where we do a full redesign of that trial registration flow, make a lot of changes, and then see how it does relative to this flow I just went through. So I'll switch over here. So there is two core problems, I would say, and then a couple tertiary problems that we identified after releasing that work in mid-May. First, there's a lot of friction. You saw there was five or so steps, even more depending on the level of verification users can get through. Sometimes it can take a few minutes for users to get all the way down through the credit card verification. We couldn't touch that for the experiment, but nonetheless, there was quite a bit of friction as users went throughout this process. Further, there's a little bit of design inconsistencies. If you go through our trial registration flow in production right now, you'll see that some cards are sized differently. Some cards have different stylings. Some cards have different border radius. There's different colors featured as well. So there's a little bit of inconsistency from page to page, which doesn't really create a very cohesive experience for users. And then as some tertiary points as well, slower time to value and poor conversion impact. So those are some problems that we were theorizing would be around in our present day trial registration flow. To move on to the hypothesis that we had then developed. So by reducing our cognitive load and unnecessary friction in the trial registration flow, we can enable prospective users to complete the trial registration flow faster. And that faster completion of registration result in users finding value faster in the product experience. So that was the general theme we were going into this work with to see if we could reduce that steps down from maybe 5 to say 3, and then see how that would impact the numbers that we'd look to track. Just to go over the scope real quick. So this is the scope of what we're going to be releasing in a couple days. First of all, we wanted to really only surface this to GitLab.com and focus on only trial registration flow. Free user registration share a lot of components. But for the purposes of this, we are only going to be focusing on trials. And further, we're only going to be releasing to 10% of that traffic. So 10% of those users were going to be getting this new candidate experience that we were going to be working on. And then there's a few other things we're just going to be monitoring, like our conversion, activation, and so on. One last thing we did is we completed an audit of all the fields that existed in the registration flow to see where they're being used. Is this field, field X essential to the current flow, or is it just there because it's there? Like, are we using it in GTM? Are we using it to personalize the experience in product? And we established a spreadsheet of all the fields, and that way we were able to educate our redesign process a little bit more than just willy-nilly removing fields as we felt made sense. So lastly, just some quick success metrics before I get into the new flow. Our two primary ones were the completion rate. So we wanted to look at what percentage of users completed the rate relative to those between the two flows to see if it was significantly better or worse with this new flow. And secondary, we wanted to look at how long it took users to get through the flow. Is this new flow significantly faster for users to get through? And then kind of as some tertiary metrics that I've kind of mentioned throughout this, we wanted to look at team activation and then paid conversion to see if getting users into the product faster led to any impact on those metrics or if those were stayed relatively similar. I'll go into now some exploration we did. So we looked into what a lot of other products out there are doing for their onboarding flows. What are the patterns out there that we could potentially look to pull into ours? Now, I'll say since this was an experiment, we couldn't go super far with pushing the boundaries of, bringing in animations and things like that. So we needed to kind of stay roughly within the confines of how the page functioned right now. But nonetheless, we wanted to see what would be possible. And if there's any, even small experiences that other companies were doing, that would be valuable to potentially bring into the future, essentially. So two things that really stood out to me from this process was Shopify's flow of having a horizontal card and only asking users one question at a time. This was something that was super consistent throughout the process. Throughout the process of all looking into all these companies, we were asking users quite a few questions at a time, and could potentially lead to some cognitive overload. But you can see here, Shopify's asking users one question at a time on each page. Far easier, we had hypothesized, for users to answer. So this was something we kind of put away in our minds for our future design iterations for the registration flow, but was a good learning from our exploration process. A second one was delight and personalization. So I'll go down to Figma's flow. Figma had a lot of really nice moments of delight in the registration flow, whether it was even just when you typed in your name and it switched from your email to your first name. Like I thought throughout, it had me wondering, all right, what are they going to do next when I complete this field? Instead of just thinking, okay, they want to know how do you plan to use Figma? Like that's a pretty basic question. A lot of companies ask it. But the way Figma implemented it made it a little bit more delightful for me to complete. So I thought that was really awesome to see. Now, when it came to actually implementing this, a couple things we really wanted to look into were, first of all, like I said, reducing steps, see if we could condense any and take the learnings from our audit and then be able to ensure that we were really surfacing the most essential steps to the users based on how we leverage the information internally. And then secondly, is there a way we can modernize the design a little bit and make it more consistent from page to page? So we explored two different primary designs. The first being a more color-based design, leveraging a gradient of some kind. And then second being dark mode. These two were explored to just try and see if having more color and more difference in the flow would be able to change the outcomes at all of the key metrics we were looking at. So we ended up exploring a lot of different iterations of all of these different paths. And ended up settling on dark mode. One of the core reasons behind that is in the future state of our registration flow, we could end up potentially leveraging system preferences to be able to surface a dark mode version of registration should a user have that as their, computer preference or light mode. So to be able to just see period how dark mode functions for users could be an interesting learning to get. And then also to tie it in, like I showed that about.gitlab.com page right off the bat, our about.gitlab.com page is very dark mode at the moment. So would having that be a little consistent with having a dark mode registration flow change sentiment at all for users? That was something also we wanted to explore. So to jump into the flow, obviously no changes to this website here. We have that get free trial CTA in the top right corner, and then this is our new get started with GitLab page. So from that previous version, we removed some copy, simplified it a little bit, and removed the first name and last name fields from this page. So have it just be username, company email, password, and then the user moves on. So a slight simplification there. Logic was in that we ended up building out a true personalization step where we have all the personalization questions in one screen and shifted that information to there. So I'll go through and click through these options, and then the user can continue on. And then this is our email verification. So we designed out the different forms and different versions of this screen. As you can see here, there's a lot of different versions of our email verification from just the one stage to two with phone number, and then down here as well with payment method verification. So we've fully encompassed it to ensure that users had like a cohesive design language throughout the process, which was a big goal for us. So user, for purposes of simplification here, just the email verification. User proceeds with the process, have a verification success screen, and then this is our personalization step, our sole personalization step, which is just the welcome to GitLab page where we have first name, last name, country, company, and then group name, project name. So you can see the pieces from the previous flow that I showed kind of brought together a little bit on this screen. So one of the follow-ups that I'm actively working on right now is doing some user research on comparing this flow to our mid-May flow to see what users think about being asked for these pieces of information at the various stages of the flow. Are we asking for that information at the right point in time, or is it better to be asking that information at a different point? So that'll be a key learning that we gather from that UX research that we'll be running shortly. So from here, the user clicks on continue to GitLab, and then they're at that same get started page. So yeah, that's the experiment that we're going to be looking to run. Like I said, we're going to be running it for 10% of our users, so it'll roughly run for 3 months. This was definitely a bigger experiment for the growth team. So there's a lot of technical considerations as well that we needed to explore from, do we create a completely different path for this new registration flow, or do we integrate it within our existing path? How do we plan out all the work for combining essentially three different steps into one? So there's a lot of very interesting technical considerations that were kept in mind throughout this process. So huge kudos to the dev team because they've done a great job at bringing this vision. And yeah, we're very excited for what this could mean for the future of our registration flow because eventually we'll be able to take a lot of great user research learnings, the experiment learnings from what we've run here, and then be able to come into a future registration flow project with a lot of great data points to be able to reference and come to a flow that works for users and then also works for our internal stakeholders. So yeah, very exciting for the future of growth and the registration flow. That's all I have for today. So any questions or anything like that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Mi-
Looks like Emily is entering a question.
Yeah, I'm midway through typing, but I can just
I can
vocalize.
finish.
I'm curious, how do you think about determining success? You mentioned some of the success metrics, but are there also qualitative factors that you're thinking about when determining success?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of that will come from the UX research. Seeing qualitatively the information we get from that, how the two compare, that's going to be our big additional data point that I think we reference. For the purpose of the experiment, it'll be predominantly comparative, like how the two compare directly to each other based on those metrics I mentioned. So that's going to be the big area of focus for the experiment specifically. But the UX research will be able to unlock a ton of learnings that help us, see how well or, differently this one performs this specific design direction.
I had a quick question. Who did you say that the
Hmm.
user is for this particular workflow? Because I was looking at the journey map, the golden SDLC journey map, and they're saying that the onboarding is the initially the IT admin type of person. So I was just curious.
Mhm. Yeah, for this, I would say it encompasses a lot of users because we funnel quite a few users into the trial registration flow, even users who attempt to go down our free user registration flow, where it can be a little bit more broad. They have a path to then get back into our trial registration flow. So I would say the main focus for here, especially once we get to this quick start screen, is admins, ensuring that they have the information to be able to get started in this experience and in GitLab as a whole. But for the trial registration, it's a tad broader just because of the amount of users that will be seeing and could be seeing and going through this flow. Yeah, I would say it's a little broad.
Yeah. Are you are you capturing that in the screener to figure out which person is which in order to help segregate the data?
For the UX research, we do have some screener questions in place to be able to ensure that for the UX research, it'll be more focused, going to be looking specifically at those who have experience with or are more of that admin type role. That's going to be for the user research for sure. We'll be more focused on that variety of user.
Cool, makes sense. Um, any other questions from anyone? Doesn't just have to be about the onboarding, could be about the process that Jesse used, the thought
Absolutely.
process, the mechanisms. No?
Awesome.
All
I'll
right.
jump in and ask one more,
Oh,
actually.
cool.
Uh, Jesse, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about how you go from like a hypothesis to success metrics.
Great question. So that's quite a bit looking at once we establish the scope and the problem, looking to then uh, establish what are some different directions we could take. And then once those directions are, we went through quite a bit of it, quite a few initial designs. And then once those initial designs were kind of figured out a little bit, we looked at the designs as a group to identify what are some of the key metrics that we could look to change. And then from the beginning, one of the ones that we wanted to look to change was completion time, just because our whole purpose was to remove aspects from that. So that one was pretty firm. But then it kind of came to be like just through discussion and then looking at some of the initial designs, the other three goals that we had and success metrics for this project. So it was a very much a collaborative effort between, myself, product, and engineering to kind of see what we could look to shift with an experiment like this.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
right. I think that is it. One last stare down for a few seconds. Any more questions, thoughts? All right. Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate the walkthrough. Thank Vitika and Will for participating today. And with that, I wish you all a good rest of your day. See you all later.
Thank you.